Government is always about choices, and it's clear to me that a full ban is the right choice. Social media is making children unhappy. It's designed to be addictive.
Overall, I think it's a bad thing, because I feel like you might feel more isolated in a way.
Whilst the ban has possibly good intentions behind it, I think it's not going to stop young people.
Penalising young people is not the answer, and the answer is to stop the problem at source by turning attention to the platforms.
The people who are very into this issue debate endlessly what is the right solution, and I want something to be done.
I take heart from the fact that for this next generation of children and young people in our country, they are going to be protected from what are so many different harms, and we know that the tech companies do not act, and that's why we've had to see action today.
Imagine this. In a year's time, scrolling through TikTok, posting pics on Instagram, sending snaps on Snapchat will, for a generation of teenagers, be akin to sneaking behind the bike sheds for a fag or swigging some vodka from a bottle masquerading as mineral water. In other words, they'll still do it, but it won't be allowed. So today, the PM banned social media for under-16s, but accepted they'd still be using it.
Now, will it mean that no child ever logs onto social media again? No. But look, this might shock you, but it doesn't shock parents of teenagers. They get around other laws too. But we don't say, oh, look, a teenager managed to get a drink somehow, so let's not bother banning alcohol sales to children. We don't do that, do we? That would be utterly ridiculous. And so I just don't accept that argument.
Plenty of people are asking if the newly announced ban is remotely workable. So the PM asked himself the question and attempted to answer it. The broadcasting watchdog Ofcom is being given new powers and more funding. But given it currently appears to be struggling to enforce existing laws, what hope is there for this new legislation, which supposedly comes into force in a year? Question number 2, that STARMER also helpfully asked and answered: what will big tech do about all this?
But it won't be easy. I mean, some technology companies want us to think that social media is unchangeable, part of an almost natural order. But we have to resist that kind of learned helplessness. We have agency. We can change it, and we will.
Now, tech companies have deep pockets. Donald Trump has their back. STARMER says he'll have a little word with him at the G7 this week. But the social media companies today warned the ban would push kids towards even less palatable platforms. Elon Musk used his own, sometimes less than palatable platform, X, to denounce the UK as a police state, saying the government's real goal was to, and I quote, enable the UK government to track everyone. Well, partly because tech companies have deep pockets, I'm obliged to point out they all say their main aim is to keep kids safe. Here's the boss of Instagram, which is owned by Meta, speaking last year on his platform.
We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can, not only to keep teens safe on Instagram, but to give parents some peace of mind and tools to shape Instagram into what works for their kid, because every kid is different. And ultimately, at the end of the day, a parent knows what's best for their individual child.
Now, I can tell you, Adam Mosseri, the Instagram boss you saw there, has today received this letter from Ian Russell, whose daughter Molly took her own life after viewing harmful content online. It's a very powerful message. Quoting back to him, Mosseri's claim after Molly's death: we do not allow posts that promote or encourage suicide or self-harm. Well, Russell, who I'll speak to on the show in a moment, tells Instagram in this letter that he's found harmful content readily available right now. And he says to Mosseri, shockingly, your platform's algorithms are still recommending ever more potentially life-threatening content to children, just as they did to Molly. He's asking to meet the Instagram boss now. Next year, it'll be a decade since Molly Russell died. In that time, not a single tech company boss has met Ian to hear his story. So let's see if Adam Mosseri does. Well, our science and technology reporter Mickey Carroll has the story of the day today, which saw the Prime Minister promising to give youngsters back their childhood. Let's take a look.
Today could be the day childhood changed for the better in the UK. Or the day the country got its hopes up, only to be let down. It started with a grand announcement.
The government will ban access to social media for all children under the age of 16.
Not only were we following the Australian example of removing under-16s from platforms like Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube and Instagram from next spring, we were going further.
We're taking world-leading action on gaming services and live streaming platforms, where, at the moment, strangers can contact any child unchecked.
Romantic AI chatbots will be banned for anyone under 18, and popular chatbots like ChatGPT or Meta AI won't be blocked, but they'll be stopped from engaging in sexual content with young people. What about the children actually affected by the ban? Despite what the government says, these teenagers don't seem to want it.
I miss using Snapchat a lot because I can't text my friends a lot, and also YouTube because a lot of my childhood memories were on YouTube, like watching with my parents and friends.
My life on social media is just as important as my life in person. So I would feel like I try get around the ban, obviously.
I think I'd be a lot more bored because there's not much to do in my day-to-day life without it. But yeah, I think I'll be spending a lot more time on homework, which is not ideal.
This social media ban has the potential to be momentous, to inspire generational change, but it all hinges on one aspect working: the ability to properly verify the ages of social media users. If that doesn't work, the whole policy fails. One of the big criticisms of Australia's social media ban is how effective it seems to have been. There is research released recently that suggested that more than 60% of young people under the age of 16, so young people that are now banned from using social media, that they were still using their social media accounts, which suggested that the ban hadn't been that effective.
Yoti runs age verification for some of the biggest companies in the world. According to its CEO, the government needs to urgently learn from other countries if it wants to make this ban a success.
The Australians were very clear that they were the first to do this and that it would take time for them to get this right. I think as an age company, we think that not requiring a buffer between the age of 16 and, for instance, a threshold of 18 to ensure that effectively anybody who is a young teenager wouldn't pass for 18 but possibly might pass for 16 hasn't helped.
And tech companies like Meta, YouTube and Snapchat, maybe unsurprisingly, say the ban won't work. In fact, they argue it'll push children to unregulated platforms. But this is all detail of the ban, which seems to be missing from today's announcement. Instead, the government says it will flesh out the finer points in the coming months.
We're making the big decision on the basis of the British public's voice, but we want to get the implementation right alongside them as well. And so today is a big decision, but the detail we're going to work through with the British public, with experts, with what is technically feasible.
It seems today was just the big idea. The devil's in the detail, and that is yet to be ironed out. Nikki Carroll, Sky News.
Well, Ian Russell is the co-founder and chair of the Molly Rose Foundation, an organisation that focuses on both online safety for young people and tech accountability. Well, Ian, thanks so much for coming in the studio. How disappointed are you with this decision today, this announcement?
I find it difficult to put into words the level of disappointment. I feel let down by a Prime Minister who, in opposition, promised to strengthen the Online Safety Act to make our digital world safer for children. Early last year, we met briefly, and he promised me, father to father, that he took this matter very seriously. Well, those promises, I think, have been broken because there's debate about the best way forward, but quite frankly, the false hope that could come by announcing a blanket ban, 16 down ban, without acknowledging the unintended consequences that come with it, I think is just disingenuous. And to have held a consultation, albeit a speedy consultation, and to not given it the full time to come to the conclusions that he's come to, less than 3 weeks since the close of that consultation, to make these monumental decisions, when the evidence that I've heard from experts, the evidence that I've heard from people in Europe, the evidence that I've heard from the Child Protection child safety sector in this country, academics, all sorts of people, was coming together to say quite clearly that banning young people, penalising young people, is not the answer, and the answer is to stop the problem at source by turning attention to the platforms.
Which is get the platforms to remove the harmful content, which is supposed to be happening under the Online Safety Act.
Well, harmful content and harmful practices like infinite scroll and harmful algorithms that recommend more and more of the harmful content and autoplay and things like that.
I'll come back to that in a minute, but I mean, you've made clear that you think this is a sort of political decision, that Keir Starmer sort of rushed this out because Andy Burnham sort of told him to. I mean, is that really what it comes down to?
Well, I can't see any reason why that he's moved that this far forward. There was only 6 or 7 weeks to look at over 100,000 responses to the consultation. And when he met with bereaved parents on the 26th of May, when that closed, he told us they'd be hard pushed, but they would do everything they could to get that consultation announcement before the summer recess, which is mid-July.
Right.
I don't know why you wouldn't take all the time. I've heard politicians use the excuse that, you know, young people are at risk now, so you have to move. But the process of introducing this ban is going to take, in parliamentary terms, until Christmas. Then it's going to take time for Ofcom to introduce it. Those
So a few
extra weeks
wouldn't have
harmed anything.
I mean, Starmer makes the argument that, you know, it's like, you know, it's akin to banning alcohol for kids. You know, you do it, you know that they will still use it, but you do it anyway. And also, there are a load of other countries, France, Spain, Denmark, just to name a few, who are banning social media for under-16s. Does that give you any pause?
No, it doesn't, because banning tobacco, banning alcohol is completely different. Tobacco is always harmful, alcohol is always harmful. Harmful tech isn't inevitable. If you go back to the time when, 2015, before the engagement-based algorithms were introduced by the platforms to keep us on their platforms, to improve their bottom line, to increase their profits, it was far less harmful then. So we know what causes the harms, and we could target the tech. The ban announced this morning does nothing to remove the harms that the platforms are purveying. And any youngster that finds their way around the ban, hacks their way around the ban, as youngsters tend to do, as they are doing in Australia at the moment, will be at danger. And then they'll feel they're outlawed. If they come across harmful content, they're less able or less in a place where they're less willing to talk to peers about it, to parents.
Yeah, and you're sounding very like some of the tech companies today, saying that, you know, actually this is going to push kids to more harmful platforms. I wonder what you make of Elon Musk saying it's a police state, the UK, and, you know, the government wants to track everybody through this.
I don't spend too much time listening to Elon Musk. I have to be honest. I listen to what he says, and I find it difficult to find a commonality with him. But basically, I think there's a group of parents that aren't the tech companies who are as disappointed with me. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing all day with concerned parents. And I'd say one of the most important things that parents must do now is not to be too quick with the response to this, because the ban isn't here yet. And talking to children about a ban while they're still allowed to be online could be detrimental. You should have conversations between the generations. That's the best way to try and ensure safety.
Well, you've written this very powerful letter to the boss of Instagram, Adam Mosseri, reminding him of his statement after Molly's death. He was clear then that Instagram didn't allow, and I quote, posts that promote or encourage suicide or self-harm. We do not yet find enough of these images before they're seen by other people. I mean, how far removed is his claim then from what is happening now and what was happening then?
Well, the bottom line and the research that we've undertaken to make sure that we're saying the right thing is that nothing much has changed. And when he says those statements, I've learned that you can't trust a tech boss, because they say the right things. They're PR companies, and people tell them to say the right things. They say the right things. You can't judge them by their words. You've got to judge them by their actions. And at the moment, the same harm that contributed to Molly, my daughter's death, 8.5 years ago, the same sort of harm is available online. And the platforms, unbelievably, the platforms are still algorithmically recommending that harm to young people. So don't trust people from tech companies when they make bold promises like that.
Next year, it will be a decade since Molly died. I could hardly believe this, but not a single tech boss has offered to meet you to talk about that, have they?
It's been a very infrequent occurrence, and I would have thought they might want to learn some lessons and debate, which is why, I gather, though, I'd love to have met Adam at Cannes, where he'll be speaking. That was the original plan.
Yeah, because you're both going to be there next week, although he's now pulled out.
He's now pulled out, but if he's not going to be there next week, I would love to meet him some other time and have a public debate, father to father, about the measures that Instagram are employing and why I don't think his platform's safe, and why he does, because I'd love that to be a public discussion, father to father, so that other concerned parents around the world can hear how he defends the lamentable record that Instagram has when it comes to safety.
Do you think he will meet you? You've sent this letter today. Any hope?
I don't have much hope, but I hope it does happen, because it would be really interesting, not just for me, but for many parents as well.
And, as I say, next year it'll be a decade since Molly died. I mean, how hard is it for you to keep fighting and knowing that other parents have been bereaved in a similar way?
It's really hard that so little has changed. And that's why I think we need to take really bold, decisive steps, not like the announcement this morning. We need to take steps that will make a difference. And the only difference comes when you compel the platforms to change what they're doing, when you compel them to stop their harmful practices. And then the online world becomes the safe world that young people should be allowed to inhabit. And I think that's what has to happen, and we need to work towards that rather than penalising young people.
Well, we did go to Meta, which is Instagram's parent company, for comment on all of this, and so far we haven't heard back. So I hope you do hear back about your letter. Let me bring in now Labour peer Baroness Luciana Berger and Conservative peer and former Minister Lord Ed Vaizey, who are on the sofa tonight. Ed, I want to bring you in first because you were a culture minister. You know what it's like to deal with the tech companies. You heard Ian there talking about he doesn't trust them because they mouth these sort of PR platitudes. What's your response?
Well, I agree with him. I mean, there's a lot going on here. And I think, when I was dealing with the tech companies, it was about IP theft, music theft, and they would assure me they were doing all they could do, and then you'd type in the name of a prominent musician and, the first 10 searches would all be pirate sites. So you can't listen to what they say in terms of what they're doing and necessarily believe them at all. And I think, when it comes to this ban, I have very sort of complex feelings about it, because I think Ian's arguments are extremely persuasive. The argument against the ban is it shifts the responsibility onto the parents. It doesn't put it onto the platforms. But at the same time, I supported the online safety bill. I got really fed up with the endless amendments that were put on it. I just wanted to see action. I wanted Ofcom to be a regulator of tech, which was a very big step, by the way. When I was doing this 10 years ago, I was told I was a moron for even thinking you could regulate tech. And so I think a bold measure like this does at least move the debate on. I'm not kidding myself that it's going to work or it's going to be a magic bullet, but as more and more countries step over this threshold, the platforms will have to adapt and change.
Your response to that, Ed sort of sitting on the fence a little bit about banning or not, need for action.
I think there is a need for action, and I think we were nearly at a place when decisive, meaningful action could take place. And I don't think this is meaningful. I don't think this is decisive. I think, sadly, I wish whatever action was taken would work quickly. But I don't want to keep talking and not give Luciana a chance because she works so hard on this issue. But all I would just simply say is that I guess what frustrated me was that the people who are very into this issue debate endlessly what is the right solution. And I want something to be done. And I just think doing something is better than doing nothing. But sorry.
Lucy, we're going to come to you in a minute, I promise you. Sorry.
I was just going to say that there's a fork in the road because you can't have both. It's really hard. Like, Ofcom have been ineffective. The worst thing that's happened to the Online Safety Act is its enforcement. Ofcom have been rubbish at that.
I would go further than that, but...
Well, there you are. So that is bad. Now, if they're now going to be the organisation that's got to implement an oncoming ban, and if they might have been thinking about taking enforcement action against a big platform, Molly Rose Foundation research showed that 3/4 of the harmful content that young people see currently comes from TikTok. So maybe they would be thinking, maybe we should do something about TikTok. They're less likely to do all that. So the talk of ban also has a chilling effect on the regulatory body, and they haven't been good enough so far. We need to encourage them, not discourage them.
Luciana, you've pushed to get this through. Just explain why.
So I think there's a lot that unites us in the conversation. I think we are united in concern about what's happening to children in this country on the social media platforms. It's rife, and we hear about it all day, every day, from health professionals who are seeing young people in accident and emergency, in their psychiatric, paediatric, inpatient units, eating disorder units, in our GP surgeries. The reports from teachers who, particularly after the weekend, are contending with online bullying and things that are rife, some really bad stuff, and then we're seeing people undergo these challenges, and the material that's being disseminated on these platforms is polluting the next generation's minds in lots of different ways. And so I think it's right that we are taking action. I warmly welcome the announcement today. I think there's much that we can learn from the Australia experience. I was in the chamber to listen to Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State, in the statement and her response. And this is not, this is not one and done. It's not that we're going to have this and that's it.
Exactly.
There's lots of work to be done to strengthen the Online Safety Act. Enforcement is absolutely key, and I would share the concerns.
But if Ofcom can't enforce the current laws, how is it going to enforce these?
And that point has been taken very strongly by government. And again, I listened to...
They seem pretty frustrated with Ofcom.
Well, enforcement was absolutely the heart of the announcement today, that we can't have this measure come forward and not have the enforcement to accompany it. So that obviously has to happen. And lots of us, we hear on a weekly basis the different challenges that Ofcom contends with, and the fines that have been imposed so far on some social media companies haven't even been paid. So of course, the regulation that comes forward has to expressly contend with that and ensure that Ofcom has both the teeth and the resources to be able to do their job. But I take heart from the fact that for this next generation of children and young people in our country, they are going to be protected from what are so many different harms. And we know that the tech companies do not act, and that's why we've had to see action today.
Yeah, Ian, I mean, your response that you're letting their tech companies off the hook is what he's been saying.
Yeah, I think absolutely that there's been a clamour for a call, but I think this has been so muddled and is the wrong answer. And there's one of the things that Ofcom are facing now is legal action from Meta. We know that Meta have sued Ofcom for the level of fines that they can impose. Now that was set in Parliament. That wasn't set by Ofcom, but that's there. And one of these are the things you learn when you look into this. One of the bases of that is the fact that not enough attention was given to the decision-making behind it.
But this is the trouble you have, you see, because you complain that Ofcom is not doing enough, but Ofcom has to win legal cases, and Ofcom has to make decisions on the basis that its decision is robust enough to withstand the challenge, the armoury that the tech companies have against an organisation like Ofcom.
They're running rings around. They're running rings around the watchdog, aren't they?
It's chalk and cheese. So that's why Ofcom is cautious. And I guess what frustrates me is, while I heartily support the campaigners, take the win, and let's keep pushing.
It is a win, and I'm really pleased by the win. I think what's very instructive was the letter that Liz Kendall, Secretary of State, wrote today to Ofcom to set the scene in terms of what's coming down the line. And obviously we have to learn from the experience of our legislation so far in the Online Safety Act, and also the legislation in Australia. Now, it's been very clear that one of the issues of the Australian legislation was that it says that technology companies should take reasonable steps. And that, for us, has been a big wake-up call, that we can't expect them to take reasonable steps. We have to be it has to be very expressive in terms of what those things should be.
Ian, thank you so much for your time. We'll carry on talking. We will keep getting you back in to talk about this as things happen.
Love to come back maybe in 6 months' time and talk about it and see where we are.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Well, let's hear Kanishka Narayan, the Minister for AI and Online Safety, who's here on the sofa a little earlier. You've given big tech a year to lobby against this ban. Are you sure you're not going to cave into them?
We've made a very decisive step today, Cathy. We had a 3-month consultation, and again, the thing we heard from the British public, from families across the country, was the level of harm young people are experiencing is too much. We have taken the decisive action. We're going to ban social media for under-16s.
In a year? I mean, it's that decisive.
We're not doing it in a year. We are doing it at the fastest pace that our democracy allows us. We have said that we're going to legislate by the end of the year, And of course, in implementation, it's going to take a few more weeks beyond that as well. But
so no lobbying from big tech will move you on this?
There are no second chances on this. Right. The level of harm is extensive. We've acted. Social media is going to be banned for under-16s.
Not even if Donald Trump this week at the G7 says to Keir Starmer, you've got to drop this, it's going to destroy our relationship. If tech companies threaten to move out of the UK, you're not going to bend?
Cathy, again and again, as with Grok on this, children's safety is a red line for us. It is not an economic calculation. And so we're not turning our back on this. No second chances.
I mean, if you look at the Australia ban, the majority of under-16s, according to the data we have, and I admit it's not complete, they seem to have avoided that ban. You say that enforcement will be stronger, but it's the case, isn't it, that Ofcom, the broadcasting watchdog, is already struggling to implement the Online Safety Act, the last set of laws you passed?
Well, look, firstly, can I just say 30 to 40% enforcement within the course of 5 months in Australia is not something to diminish overly. If you look at some similar examples, whether it's seatbelts or smoking in pubs, actually the trend rate of enforcement is not bad at all. But let me say two things on how we're going to be tougher still. One, our law is tougher on age checks. In Australia, platforms just have to take reasonable steps. In Britain, they have to make sure age checks are highly effective. The second thing on Ofcom is really important because you're right, the regulator has to be strong. And so one of the things we're doing is making sure Ofcom is properly resourced, and there's an urgent review that we've asked Ofcom to do of how it's going to make sure it has the capabilities to prioritise enforcement of this straight out of the gates, not wait for weeks, but straight out of the gates, enforcing properly.
But when you talk about proper resources, I mean, how many more staff are you thinking to make this effective?
Well, I'm not going to make that judgment on the hoof. Ofcom has been asked to do an urgent review well before this falls onto the statute books and is implemented. We will have that review. We will take a right call and want to make sure that Ofcom is ready to enforce on day one.
Well, I mean, I've done a bit of a review myself, and, 3 social media companies have been fined. None of them have paid that fine. And when you look at what the Molly Rose Foundation has done, they've surveyed nearly 2,000 children. Nearly half of teenage girls saw high-risk, harmful content on social media in just a week. The Ofcom is not making the current laws work, is it?
Well, look, one of the big things is that we think the level of harm being experienced by young people is still too high. That is exactly why we're banning platforms for under-16s. A very simple, clear thing to enforce. Banning platforms for exactly the reason that the harm is being too extensive. But the second thing to say is that the Online Safety Act is less than a year into implementation. There are, of course, ways in which more can be done. But Ofcom has now had over 100 investigations. 4 companies have been fined millions. I think in some cases.
But the social media companies who have been found in breach of laws against children have not paid the fines, have they?
There are clear legal powers for Ofcom to enforce those fines, both through the courts and ultimately through shutting those businesses down as well. And so if the companies are not going to pay, they have to pay in having their businesses shut down in this country because the cost of operating here is to keep our young people safe.
Are you happy with the job that Ofcom is currently doing?
I'm absolutely not happy with the pace and rigour of us acting and keeping young people safe. We want to go further, we want to go faster. That is why we have asked Ofcom to do an urgent review of its capability. We will give it all the powers, all the resources to make sure that it's acting robustly.
You said us. I mean, are you frustrated with Ofcom? Do you think they need to go further? Be clear.
I've written to Ofcom historically, and I've said to them in public that there needs to be greater transparency and they need to go faster and further. And so that is a pretty clear statement of where I want them to go.
Right, so there's an element of frustration that you're expressing here with the watchdog about this whole area.
Cathy, I've sat with bereaved families telling me that their young people in their families had experienced the worst harms online. And so when I hear that, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm not frustrated and that I'm content with it. Of course I'm frustrated. I want us to act quicker, act faster and further.
We have a bereaved father on the programme tonight, Ian Russell, father of Molly. He says you're letting big tech off the hook in this ban. He wants big tech to remove this harmful content themselves. What do you say to him? Because he makes a very powerful argument, doesn't he?
Well, firstly, can I just say that I have hugely respected everything Ian has done in the worst tragedy to advocate for other people despite everything he has experienced. And so I have nothing but the deepest respect for Ian. We've learned a lot from him and the Molly Rose Foundation, much of which we've implemented. On this question, there are 2 things to say. One, of course we want proper regulation and harmful features to be removed. We are keeping that up. We're actually levelling up, as I said, the regulatory capability to be able to enforce what is already in place. But the harm young people under 16 are experiencing is so stark, as we've heard over the course of the last few months, as we've heard actually just even today with other bereaved families too, that it's not right for us to wait for the enforcement of long-running regulation in that. We have to act more urgently. We've got to break glass on it. That's what we've done in banning it for under-16s.
We've predictably had a response from the tech companies today, YouTube and Meta, saying that the ban will push kids towards more harmful, less safe, unregulated alternatives. YouTube says that it's a vital educational resource. But I wanted to ask you about Elon Musk's comment. He says that the UK is a police state and that this ban is, and I quote, to enable the UK government to track everyone. What do you make of that?
Well, Cathy, there's a choice for us in our politics here. Bereaved families, parents, young people in this country on one side, a foreign trillionaire on another side. I know which side we're taking as a government, always on the side of British parents and families in this country. I think Elon Musk doesn't have an understanding of what we're trying to do here, and so I'd be happy to educate him on the legislative context. In many ways, we have a deep respect for free speech and expression in our law in this country. That is not a trade-off that we're making here. We're simply putting child abuse as a thing that we're not going to tolerate in this country.
But you will be collecting a lot of data, and, you know, the facial recognition stuff could potentially put vulnerable people at risk, couldn't it?
Well, look, there are loads of instances in which a proportionate way of collecting data has helped stop children being abused. We've already had age gating on porn sites. We have seen some of that in early evidence being quite effective too. But we give our data for banking services. We give our data to travel to Europe. What we're doing here is saying it's got to be highly effective in a privacy-preserving way. And so if you've had an account, or, for example, or a credit card, or a email address for more than 15, 16 years, you don't need to give any more data because that's proof enough that you're over 16.
I mean, you called Elon Musk a trillionaire, which he is obviously now, the first trillionaire. It's quite hard to take on a trillionaire, isn't it?
Well, on this question, I think it's very clear. There's a red line when it comes to children's safety. As I said earlier, it's not an economic calculation. We will always make sure children's safety comes first. And this is a question for domestic policy. It is not a question for negotiation with foreign trillionaires.
Are you a bit disturbed by his daily diatribe about the UK?
Well, I am a bit frustrated that we are allowing, as I say, foreign rich people to intervene in the public discourse here. And you know, the big thing I say to politicians and political parties that are relying on that crutch is I think the British public won't judge it very kindly.
Obviously, Andy Burnham backed this ban. He's changed his position on a few things. Are you confident that it will survive a change of Prime Minister?
I'm very confident, and I'm very confident in this policy because for the last few months, the British public has expressed a very clear view. I've spoken to about 1,500 young people directly. I've spoken to many families again and again. The weight of evidence, the weight of the voice of families in this country is clearly in one direction. We've got to do justice to them.
I wonder if you'll keep your job if there's a change at the top, and if you're supporting the Prime Minister in any leadership contest, or if you might, you know, throw your lot in with Andy Burnham.
Well, Cathy, I think you'll be better placed to predict the political weather. I'm here to try and make it in my particular job as long as I have it.
You'd like to work under Andy Burnham, though, if you could?
Well, look, I'm really passionate
about.
I'm passionate about technology's role in both keeping young people safe, but also growing our economy and giving them opportunities. So as long as I have the job, whether as a backbench MP or in my job, I'll keep doing it.
That's your pitch to Andy Burnham. Kanishka Narayan, thank you very much for coming in the studio and sitting on the sofa.
Thanks very much.
Well, we mentioned Andy Burnham there. Here's a full list of candidates for the Makerfield by-election. And here are the rest. And the social media ban is sure to feature heavily on our late-night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 p.m. Here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be Daily Mirror columnist Kevin Maguire and former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Baroness Arlene Foster. Well, now, Keir Starmer is in France for the G7 summit, where he'll try to straddle the line between a world leader dealing with global issues and a man whose own leadership is in turmoil. The Prime Minister's defence investment plan is on the list of things that could prove to be a bit of a headache. And back here, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch urged him to either invest £28 billion in defence or quit.
It could not have been easy for the former Defence Secretary, a Labour man through and through, when he said, and I quote, "I am being forced to make decisions that would increase the risk to personnel on operations and could make the country less safe." That is absolutely shocking. What on earth is the government playing at? The statement that the Minister has just given shows that the government are still in denial. He did not say that there would be extra money for the Defence Investment Plan, as his former mentor, so he says, asked for. The Prime Minister needs to tell the Chancellor to find the money. The answer is to cut the welfare budget.
Well, let's have a chat with our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who's over in Parliament. John, it's quite a week for the PM ahead, then.
Well, let's be brutal. It's possible that this is Sir Keir Starmer's last attendance at the G7, and it's probably going to be quite bumpy for him because after what we've heard from Elon Musk about the social media ban, the President of the United States is likely to criticise it as well, and he's a big friend of big tech in America. So that's something that the Prime Minister is probably going to get an ear bashing over from President Trump. Then, of course, the row over defence spending and the fact that the British Defence Secretary has quit because there's not enough being spent on defence. And, of course, the President has time and time again criticised European governments, particularly the British, for not spending enough money on defence. Now, that was Kemi Badenoch there with an urgent question on the whole John Healey resignation and the crisis over defence spending. She attacked the fact that the new Defence Secretary, Dan Jarvis, wasn't there to answer it. Luke Pollard was the minister. Turned out Dan Jarvis was seeing the King to be made a Privy Councillor. But Mr Pollard was ridiculed by some MPs for saying that Mr Healey had asked him to stay on. Then we had the social media statement from Liz Kendall. She was due to speak to Labour MPs at the Parliamentary Labour Party. That didn't happen. Just a business meeting, one way to quell dissent, I suppose, cancel the meeting effectively. But there were more questions than answers during the Liz Kendall statement. She talked about getting Ofcom to police it, to regulate it. No detail there, of course. And the Tory Shadow Technology Secretary, that's Julia Lopez, she first of all ridiculed the government over this abrupt U-turn, saying that not long ago the Prime Minister was against this. And of course, the Tories defeated the government in the Lords on this lots of times, and only for the government to send it back in parliamentary ping-pong. The other point that Julia Lopez made was that the government's trying to bring in a ban on under-16s on social media at the same time as it's legislating to give 16-year-olds the vote. Well, then when we eventually saw Dan Jarvis in the chamber on the incident in the Channel with the Russian spy ship, surprise, surprise, who should be sitting next to him in the chamber but Rachel Reeves? That was raised by an old Tory warhorse, Julian Lewis, who said, what's that all about then? Mr Jarvis said, it's because the Chancellor cares very deeply about our national security. That's why she's here to lend that support. Well, one grandee from the House of Lords came down and spoke to me a short time ago and said they've got to find the money somewhere for this extra defence spending. That grandee, a veteran of the Blair and Brown government, also said if Sir Keir Starmer stands against Andy Burnham, he will lose. And we parted with him saying if this government was a horse, it would be taken out and shot. Oh dear, that really is brutal.
Certainly is, John. Thanks very much for bringing us all those colourful quotes and observations. Really appreciate it. Luciana Berger and Ed Vaizey are still with us. Of course, Luciana, it's going to be a very bumpy G7, isn't it? With everything going on social media, immigration, defence. I mean, there's no end of things that there could be clashes with Starmer and Trump over.
And yet it's such an important moment for all the countries to be coming together and to contend with some really thorny issues that are happening across the world. We don't hear much about it, but issues of China flooding markets in terms of supply, real issues when it comes to Ukraine that we actually want to see coordination and collaboration across the G7 on. And so that's, I know what the focus is supposed to be, and I hope that we can see them come together, particularly, just over the course of the past week, we've seen some real challenges globally around technical innovation as well, and how we need to really be thinking collectively about how we contend with those problems.
Challenges domestically, though. When it comes to defence, for a start.
There are a lot of challenges domestically, but this event was scheduled a long time ago to coincides just after President Trump's 80th birthday, and it's good that he is at least going to be there, because I know there was some kind of shuffling around with the timing, but it is important that those leaders come together at this time because of these events.
Ed, it was really striking, the footage of the boarding of the Russian ghost ship. I mean, that was a real sort of defence coup, wasn't it, at a time when Keir Starmer really needed to prove that, you know, we're not busted.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously, it's a very, very serious action to take a sanctioned tanker out of action as it crosses through the English Channel, and I wouldn't for a minute accuse this government of doing it in a cynical way. I'm quite serious about that, because I think you don't take an action like that unless it's absolutely necessary. But nevertheless,
it was convenient.
The silver
lining,
lining, if I can put it that way, is that those are great pictures of our commandos seizing some equipment, and Keir Starmer will not have been disappointed to see those. I mean, you know, it is going to be a difficult summit for Keir Starmer. One of the things I sort of admire about him is that he sort of keeps carrying on, which is something the British like. But having lost his Defence Secretary and his Armed Forces Minister, that kind of pretense is becoming increasingly kind of fragile and difficult to pull off. But we had the social media announcement today. I didn't want to say it really in front of Ian Russell, who works so hard on these issues, but, you know, you can't escape the feeling that the reason, Ian, it was rushed out was because the Prime Minister is running a separate election campaign to Andy Burnham in parallel, which is to get as many announcements out as possible.
Lots more still to come, so stay tuned, of course.
We're going to make it easier for businesses to employ British workers. We're going to make it easier to employ British workers than to employ migrant workers.
Well, while Labour appears to be imploding in front of our eyes, Reform UK is doing its best to keep its momentum going. Right after Keir Starmer announced his social media ban, Robert Jenrick unveiled a policy of his own to reverse Rachel Reeves' increase in employer national insurance. Jenrick vowed to slash the tax from 15% to 13.8%. There is a catch. It'll only apply to British workers. And to pay for it, companies will be hit with a new migrant worker levy of nearly £4,000 for every migrant worker they employ. Well, the man himself, Robert Jenrick, is on the sofa now. Robert, thanks very much for coming in. Let's just talk. So you're taxing companies for hiring foreigners. What is a foreign worker? I mean, is it anyone without a British passport? Does it include EU citizens with settled status? Just explain.
It'll be anybody who isn't a British citizen. So the premise is very simple. Rachel Reeves' decision 2 years ago to increase employers' national insurance has had a devastating effect on the British economy. Unemployment has risen by almost 200,000 since then. And in particular, young people have suffered. Every business that I visit is in despair at that decision. And so it has to be reversed. And we have been thinking carefully about how reform could do so. And we've chosen to do it for British workers, to create a very clear incentive for British employers to do the right thing and go out into their local labour markets and employ Brits. And get British people off welfare, which is clearly costing us an absolute fortune as a country, as well as being a moral disaster because there are so many people out of work.
I'll come
get
back
them
to
back into the workplace.
I'll come back to that in just a second. But so to confirm, it does include EU citizens who were given settled status after Brexit. I mean, you're ripping up a promise. You're ripping up an international treaty if you do that, aren't you?
Well, I understand that it will require renegotiation with the EU. We've already said that in the past because we've said we don't intend to pay benefits to people who aren't British citizens. And so we will have to renegotiate this. But even beyond that, the numbers still add up. So even those people who are not EU nationals, who are not people with EU settled status, if those people pay this fee, then that will raise about 10 or 11 billion pounds. In fact, precisely 11.2 billion pounds, which is the exact sum, if I just finish this point, is the exact sum of money that you need to reverse Rachel Reeves's very damaging employers' national insurance hike for the British workers.
I'll come back to the sum of money in just a second. I'm talking about people here, the 3 million citizens who got settled status. They came here, they were given a promise that was made by a previous government, and you're just ripping up that promise. I mean, the boss of the 3 million who represents those EU citizens says this is racist
boss
politics.
Of the 3 million. I'm not sure who this self-appointed spokesperson is.
But look, it's a
Kathy,
woman who
my view is this.
Yeah, but she's saying it's racist politics. You're talking about anti-white prejudice.
That is absolutely absurd. What we're saying is, for the first time, and I appreciate this is different from what successive Labour and Conservative chancellors have done in the past. For the first time, a reform government is going to prioritise British citizens. We're going to say that British citizens will be subject to a lower rate of tax to those people who are not Brits.
Yeah, and you're discriminating
I think
against people based on where they come from, and these people were made a promise.
Well, it's not discrimination, to my mind, to say that if you are the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the United Kingdom, you should prioritise Brits when it comes to tax and spend, rather than people who are not citizens of this country. We're not a hotel, Cathy. We are a country. And in a country, the government should serve the people of that country,
right, so
not people who just happen to come here.
But
they're not a prisoner in this country. If they want to go and live and work elsewhere, then they can
They've made their homes here based on promises by previous
governments. Well, they're not
British
citizens, Cathy.
Well,
if they want to become British
settled status.
They're not British citizens.
OK, but they've
if they want to be British
citizens,
then they can apply for British citizenship.
Right.
If they choose not to, then they will be subject to this change. And it's the right thing to do.
Well, let me talk about the Brits that you want to prioritise here, because if you claim three main benefits available to people out of work, you get between 31,000 and 49,000. Now, if you work full-time on a national living wage, that gets you to just 23,000 after tax. How are you going to force unemployed Brits to take this up when they can do better on benefits? How are you going to deal with that?
Well, I appreciate it works both ways. What this does today, this announcement, is create an incentive for the employers to go out and look for Brits to employ.
Yeah, what if
and
they
that's
don't want
important.
to be employed?
But it does have to work in the other direction as well. You are absolutely right to say that. We also have to reform the benefit system so that those people who are choosing not to work, and we accept there are people like that, then they are given a much stronger push to get back into the labour market. I'll give you some examples of what we've already said in that respect. We've said that
briefly, if you would,
you should not be able to claim disability benefits for mild anxiety. You shouldn't be able to get disability benefits and be out of work claiming job seekers allowance if you do not have a face-to-face appointment with a proper clinician. No just doing it by email or Zoom call with your local GP. So we are going to make it much harder for people to choose to be out of work. But on the employer side, it is absolutely right that there is a big incentive for those employers to go out and hire Brits. It is not controversial to say that British employers should predominantly be employing British workers.
Right. Let me move on to a broader point, that a heated discussion that's been had on immigration in the last few weeks. Your party reacted with fury to the murder of Henry Novak and also the terrible stabbing in Belfast. After that, there was what was called a racist pogrom. That's not my words, but the leader of the SDLP on the streets of Belfast.
Well, I don't like people.
Let me finish my question.
I don't like people misappropriating the language of the Holocaust. But what I will completely accept that the scenes we saw. Well, I don't think that is the right language, but I completely accept
children were being dragged from their homes on the basis of their
let me finish
colour.
my point, Cathy. I completely accept that what we saw in Belfast was disgraceful. And I don't support that. Of course not. Is there a broader point, nonetheless, about what has been happening in this country in recent times with respect to illegal migration? Yes, absolutely. It is a disgrace that successive prime ministers, Conservative and Labour, have refused to do what is necessary to stop people like this coming into the country, barbarians like that man, coming into the country and committing appalling crimes. That individual, let me say this, that individual would not have been in Belfast. He would have been in Rwanda if Rishi Sunak had taken my advice and made sure that the bill he was pushing through Parliament in 2022 and 2023 was sufficiently strong.
There's active legal proceedings now. I want to talk about the broader point in just a second, but I also want to come back to what you said about this wasn't a racist pogrom. I accept that this is a quote
I didn't say that. I just said I don't like people misusing terminology that relates primarily to the Holocaust.
But those scenes were appalling, Cathy. On the basis of their colour.
I thought
is
it was
that
disgusting.
not racist?
I think they were disgusting scenes.
Were they racist?
Absolutely. Look, if people are being dragged from their homes purely because they were ethnic minorities, then yes, absolutely, that is appalling. I do not in any sense condone that, and no one does. But what we should not do is close down the debate in this country about illegal migration.
Yeah.
The reason why a lot of people are legitimately angry about what has been happening is because migrants are coming into the country, governments are not willing to do what is necessary, and separate to that, we've got what happened with poor Henry Novak, which is where police forces like Hampshire Police had it drilled into them due to this anti-racism training that they'd had, that they should treat people differently on the colour of their skin. I simply want to return to a very simple British principle that everyone should be treated equally before the law,
right, and
irrespective of the colour of their skin.
I also want to return to your career as Immigration Minister, because you were Immigration Minister when the streamlined asylum process was introduced, which reportedly rushed through Hadi Aladid's application without a face-to-face interview. It was introduced because you'd lost control of immigration, wasn't it?
It was introduced because the Conservative government, of which I was a part, had completely lost control of our migration system.
You were Immigration Minister.
Well, let me finish the point. And successive Prime Ministers refused to do what was necessary. As soon as I entered the Home Office, it was obvious to me that we had to leave the ECHR, hive out all of this mad human rights laws that were preventing us from doing what was required, and get barbarians like that man out of this country.
Did you complain about the introduction of the streamlined asylum process?
I resigned, Cathy.
No, you resigned.
I resigned.
But that was sometime after it was introduced.
It was a couple of months later.
Well,
it was a couple of months later. I went to Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, as in fact did Suella Braverman, the then Home Secretary, and we said we have to pass stringent legislation immediately which gets these people out of our country.
Right, and were you
she was
complaining
sacked
for months because it was...
She was sacked for saying that, and I resigned. I then went on to the backbenches.
You resigned in December 2023. The streamlined asylum process was introduced in February. Were you complaining all that time behind the scenes?
Yes.
All that time,
wow. Look, what we saw in Belfast, I'm afraid, does not surprise me. It shocked me, but it did not surprise me because I received advice regularly, as did the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Prime Minister, that terrorists were entering our country, that men who were likely to commit the most heinous crimes against our own citizens were marauding the streets of our country, were subjects of interest of the security services. And Rishi Sunak, just like his predecessors and just like Keir Starmer, have chosen to do absolutely nothing to stop this. And that's why I resigned. And that's why ultimately I chose to back Nigel Farage, because I concluded...
But you do accept responsibility for your part in this failing?
Well, I accept responsibility for my own actions.
Do you accept responsibility for the failures over immigration? Do you impart...
No, of course not. Because, Cathy, and this is the point, if my advice had been followed, that barbarian would be languishing in Rwanda, not on the streets of our country. Right. I chose to back Nigel Farage and to leave the Conservative Party because I believed he was and is the only man who has the courage to sort this out once and for all and protect the British people, which is what needs to be done.
He said on his Substack yesterday that foreign nationals would be removed because they were living in social housing. You said they wouldn't be removed just because they were living in social housing. Did you misspeak? Do you disagree?
No, look, our policy is very simple. We are not going to give council houses, social housing, to anyone other than British citizens. Now, if there are people who are living in those homes today, well, a reform government is going to ask them to leave. They're going to have 3 months to find accommodation in the private sector.
So you've signed up to the policy now?
I have always agreed with this approach.
Well, no, you said something different on Sky News last month.
No, that's not correct. I said that if they're here and they cannot meet our economic test, then they won't be staying in the country. They'll be deported. And that's absolutely right, because I want council housing to be for Brits. You know, it is a disgrace today that just across the river from this studio, the First Lady of Sierra Leone has a council house, despite the fact... Now. Well, only because I took it up and I wrote to Southwark Council and shamed them.
So you're not...
She should be booted out, and Cathy, that home should be given to a veteran.
So you're not finding yourself
the victim of domestic abuse, a British citizen in need of a good quality home.
You're not finding yourself too much to the left of your new home, your new party?
I don't think so, Cathy. Look, I don't see this about left or right, incidentally. What reform stands for is the common sense, common ground of British people in this country. We are giving voice to millions of people who are sick of the old parties and, if I may say so, the media, who have ignored the concerns of British people for far too long.
Right, I have to end it there, but thank you very much. It's been great having you here on this Old Media, New Media show on the sofa. Thank you very much.
Nice to see you.
That's it for tonight. Back tomorrow at 7. Good evening.